We are live now. Audio. Not yet, but almost.
What you guys do at home is fine. Not on the podcast.
Why is Facebook not working?
Or do it on the podcast. Might give us listeners.
You got another complaint letter.
Or not. Stop putting fingers and butts.
That's a shitty thing to say.
It's free. It's not live.
Is it on Facebook?
Yes, it's got a notification. I did.
God, what is up with Mikey's mic or camera? It's fucking.
Hands, butts.
Yeah, I think I can fix that.
Fix that. It's like all fucking jiggity.
No, where's the? There it is.
Yes.
I think it's the IS.
All those, is that what causes it to?
It's one of them.
Oh,
It's
okay.
one of these.
Which order?
Oh, I
Brewing down there.
just fucking did something.
I tried to put everything else in there. Nope.
Whoa! Oh, gosh, man.
Yeah, I don't know what it is then.
Also, I know that.
So we can pay you back.
What's that? I know. I got your receipt over here somewhere.
20 bucks.
Yeah, why is this fucking camera on? Well, that's your old camera. That's why.
Is it?
Yeah.
It hadn't been fucked up.
I don't know. Try to restart. All these phones want to update the shit too.
Yeah, we need to do that.
Gross. Fucking pecans all over it too. Whoa. Certainly. That hurt a little bit.
Wow.
That's why I was doing it for.
Mark.
Is that better?
Mark. A little loud. A little loud. Mark.
Jiggity, isn't it?
Are you okay? That one's out there. Motherfucker.
Hawaiian's good.
Nice. Shit.
Take the fucking and a cheesy breaded bacon.
Well, there are towels here, so I'm using them.
I can see it's this.
Pretty sticky.
Yep, sticky.
Aaron Rodgers, like from the Green Bay Packers. Football reference, small stuff. Foosballs are devil. My mama said that alligators are full berries because they all can't run.
Pull the microphone over like you're gonna talk on it. So I can aim this camera, Chris.
What?
Pull the microphone so like you're gonna talk on it so I can aim it.
I am now talking on a microphone.
There you
I
go.
am talking on a microphone.
Good.
Microphones.
Thank you.
I am talking on microphones. And ordering shitty pizza. And ordering pizza that Mikey doesn't like on
Okay.
purpose. Because F you, Mikey. Pineapple is delicious. How dare you?
Pineapple juice is good. Pineapple has no business on a pizza.
No, I don't really want to.
On the planet.
Christina's being too polite. Yeah, no, I'm not really into that. Sorry. Two minutes, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I know.
I have to restart that timer.
No, it'll be all right.
Kind of pizza that's hard to cook because it's a lot of dumb shit.
Got him brain farts tonight.
Better than regular.
Thank you so much for doing that.
You are a problem. As long as you go, like, yes. Yes, I did.
I saw your fire.
1 minute, 43 seconds.
We're showing it freaking live here.
Is it mine?
Yes.
It magically filled itself.
Magically.
Before we got into it.
Oh, I know why. I didn't push one.
So is this minute
No, it's
17,
going.
16 seconds?
It's correct.
That is correct.
I guess you better get in here.
I guess I'm better.
Where's the video, though, dude? Where's the... Oh, no, this already goes into the video,
Yeah,
correct?
it goes into the video and it does a countdown.
Now, how do I get the, whatever on here?
All you have to do is hit the red button. You're good to go.
Yeah, but where's this waveform, dude?
You need that?
No,
Just
no,
go back to track.
track. There we go.
Oh, maybe not. Control.
EQ? No, controls.
EQ, trying to. What are you looking for?
You know how it just shows the whole... That's fine. Whatever. I don't
We have
need
to.
Fuck it.
Greg showed you how to do that last time.
Yeah, audio is live.
Hey, I love the 70s retro.
Why does it go to 70s retro every time we're done with the countdown?
Someone likes 70s retro.
The good old days.
When America was great. Nothing but partying.
only cost a nickel.
All right. I guess you guys know who's saying what, right?
Mm-hmm. Welcome back to Come and Brew It Radio, coming to you from Texas Brewing Inc. in Haltom City, Texas. You can find us on the web at txbrewing.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and share with all your friends.
In this episode, we'll go over a recent listener request, washing yeast for future use. Then we dive into our next Belgian style, category 25C, Belgian Golden Strong. To start, yeast washing is an area we often get questions about, and surprisingly we find out that the concept is new to many longtime homebrewers. Basically, you take that fresh yeast cake, get a recent batch, and save all those viable yeast cells to use in the next or a far future batch. Not only is what you collect generally in better shape than what you originally bought, it'll make for a much easier starter when you need it. Plus, you can always keep a preserved batch of something special for later use. After that, we'll dive into our next Belgian segment, this time covering the popular Belgian Golden Strong and, along the way, shenanigans. So hopefully you enjoy.
Before we get started, please be sure to check out our Patreon account to help support the show. Every little bit counts, and if you visit patreon.com/CommonBrewRadio, we have a variety of options for you to help keep the show going. Get involved and improve it. Plus, we'd like to thank Aaron Rogers for becoming a patron, all the way out in Tucson, Arizona.
Thank you, Aaron.
I don't think that's the Aaron Rodgers, though.
It
Oh, I
could
thought
be
you were going to
a
say
Aaron Rodgers, though.
I thought you were going to say Wisconsin, Green Bay, but
I know, right? Well, I'm Mikey B.
I'm Greg.
I'm Chris.
I'm Stubby.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Man, when I read that, that's a lot longer than I expected it to be.
That, you know,
Could've
a
been
little
much
chatty,
shorter,
you know.
sorry.
But
I thought about telling everybody a bedtime story tonight.
What's up, Brandon? Why aren't you here? Jerk.
yeah. He's too busy, you know, opening a new brewery in his new house.
His back 40.
Yeah. So Brandon's getting a new house, so he's not going to be here today. So he feels like he needs to stay at home and, you know, miss out on all the great beers that we have lined up here in a little bit. So
I'm not saying anything because I know how
We have
what
two,
that misery is.
$2 whole worth
it's
of
only
beer.
been 15. It's only been 15 years since I moved. So I've got.
It's painful.
God forbid if I ever have to do it again, because
Only 1 year for
man,
me.
I've collected a whole lot of shit in 15 years. So it's going to be an absolute pain in the butt.
That's why I just
Or a blowout extravaganza
I
sale
throw
at Stubby's
everything
house.
away. Yeah. Every time I move, I'm like, how much crap can I get rid of?
blowouts. That's what when you get older, right?
Every time.
Or you eat at Poncho's.
Yeah, ponchos for sure. All right, guys. So anyway, I think this is an interesting subject that we're gonna talk about tonight. But before we get to that, let's recent happenings. Do we have any recent happenings that's going on?
You know, the only thing I could think of that I came across this week was that, as far as craft beer goes, was Green Flash opened another brewery in Virginia, or they opened one in Virginia last year, and they just announced opening another brewery in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Wow.
Okay.
I thought, Lincoln,
Wow.
Nebraska. I get the logistics of this, but that's an interesting place to choose for
Yeah,
craft beer
because it's
destination, you know?
relatively small. I
Yeah.
mean, we it's kind of funny because we were looking that up because you know, one of our local breweries here recently released in Nebraska, and we thought it was kind of interesting. I was like, man, why would people go to Nebraska? It's got to be. I mean, two biggest towns, you know, in Nebraska are Lincoln and what's the other one in Omaha?
Omaha,
Yeah. So you know, we were looking at it and we're like, man, it's smaller than Arlington, you know, between those two. I mean,
They're like
combined. So interesting though, but maybe.
Well, they are like the convention capital of the world. It seems like in
Oh, really?
America, everything seems to like where's that happening? Oh, in Omaha. Oh, in Lincoln. You know,
Yeah.
I guess it's because it's in the middle.
Evidently, they have good steaks there too.
Yeah, that's
you know, in
true.
Omaha.
Oh,
But anyway,
yeah,
no.
companies from there.
So it was kind of interesting though. But then we started looking at, you know, Kansas and all the Midwest, you know, little I guess, you know, cities and stuff in the towns. But evidently they got a pretty viable, you know, brew scene up
Hell
there.
yeah.
So I know we support a few of the.
Well, the grain's close. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. So we support a few of the homebrew clubs up there and their events that they have every year too. So that's kind of a cool thing. But so anyway, we kind of started figuring it out in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I thought this was interesting, that if we just had Dallas and Fort Worth, the metropolitan area here, if you had as many people that are in this area, and we just called that a state, we'd be the 12th largest state in the nation.
Yeah.
So it's insane that we have that many people here, but maybe that's the reason we're having.
That
We're
explains
gonna
the traffic.
yeah, maybe that explains too why we have 70 plus breweries that's going to be here by the end of this year. So there's plenty of them around. We actually have one that we're going to drink tonight that's actually a Golden Strong that I've never drank before. So we'll see.
Had it, but it's been a while. Like
Oh,
when it
you've had
first
that
came
one?
out, yeah. I
Okay.
think they actually brought it to
Woodbridge?
one of the shows. I feel like.
Woodbridge?
Oh, you're talking about that. I thought you meant the
No.
whole lang syne.
Oh no, I've
Yeah.
got one of those too. So
Oh, you found one.
yeah,
Nice.
that's a good one. So also quick question or quick shout out before you guys. I'm getting ready to go to Brussels, and I'm going to be in Brussels and Belgium, and I'm going to go to. I think we're going to go to Bruges, and a few other things. And man, that's a big ass burrito, dude.
Can you do
Put
that?
it in your mouth.
A little bit closer to the mic, Zach.
But
Y'all
I
can't
was just
hear
going to
it, but
say
Zach
I'm
is
going to
eating a
do some. I'm
burrito.
going to do some actual you know, commentary on my page. So make sure to follow me at Brendan Stubby Stubblefield on Facebook, and I'm going to be doing some live feeds from there at different breweries. So if you want to check that out, make sure to follow my Facebook page.
Is that Brew with Stubby, right?
It's a Brew with Stubby. Yeah. So make sure to. I'm going to keep telling you guys. I got another 2 or 3, 4 weeks, I think, before we go. But I'm going to try to do some fun stuff out there while I'm at. Maybe you guys can tell me where to go too. So if you guys have some special places that you like in Belgium, before I make it to Germany, make sure to shoot me an email.
Give Stubby some ideas.
Yeah, give me some ideas. So I'd love to hear it. Love to hear from you guys. So anyway. Anybody else have anything?
I know that the Brigadoon Brewery just opened their satellite brewing in Houston. I didn't put it on the sheet.
Brigadoon.
Brigadoon. They're originally based out of the Texas Renaissance Festival.
Okay.
It started out as a very, very small brewery, and they just started a actual satellite location for teaching brewing in addition to brewing their actual batches.
Same method.
Pasadena.
Using the same traditional old school like they do at the Ren
Oh,
Fest.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, like with the rocks and stuff.
No, that they're actually using stainless steel.
Oh, okay. No, but
they're
there's
doing classic.
What is that
styles.
style called? Stein beer.
Yeah.
Stein beer, yeah.
Yeah, Stein beer. So just like heat a rock up. It's
Yeah,
hot as
that's
hell.
how
Toss it
boil
in.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you throw
Just
it
keep
in there.
throwing
Hot
rocks
rocks in there.
in
Yeah.
there to boil. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why beer back then was all smoky and
Well,
little
that's how they
sour.
dried it.
Yeah.
But then it's probably really caramely.
yeah.
Probably caramel. Because I mean, you think about it. If you get a rock hot enough to where it'll boil something, man, that thing's gonna be like molten lava. I mean, damn near molten.
It's going to be
Yeah, I mean,
800, 1200 degrees dropping
Yeah,
it in.
I mean, you would have to do like a blacksmith type thing.
Pretty
I would
much,
imagine,
yeah.
with some air, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, interesting
Good sound
stuff.
effects.
So yeast washing. This is one of those things that, man, I know not
Hey.
everybody does it, but I tell you what, when you hear about people that have been brewing forever and they don't, they're like, what? Wait, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know? It happens a lot. So, I mean, we had some questions before about this, and it's one of those things where it's just the good thing about yeast washing is that, especially if you come across something that's hard to get, you can keep that around at your house for a while and make it a house strain. So, like, if you really have something that's working for you, you can make your own house strain, you know? And the good thing is that it's a much more viable way to get going for your next batch, right?
Right. I think the main thing that you would, to me, I guess the main reason I would see it viable to wash yeast, and especially, at least in my perspective, is if you have a strain that you can't ordinarily get.
Right.
So if I want to culture something, let's say it's a seasonal white yeast or a white lab, something that I really like and I can't buy that year round, that to me seems like a viable option
Right.
for me.
Or it's hard to get the shipped
yeah,
to you where you're
exactly.
at, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or you might get some kind of special strain from some brewery in Europe or something, and you want to culture that yeast and reuse it over and over and over.
Which
I think.
You have a good point about that. Even if you cultured something from a specific brewery, if you had that option, you may as well take what's in that yeast cake out. Now, if you're talking about wild and whatnot, that's a bit of a different animal for this kind of thing. But, you know, if you have something that came out from somewhere that nobody makes that strain, that's the best way to keep it, you know? Get it,
Yeah.
wash it, and keep it.
Well, and then
so.
you can get even more nerdy and stuff into it where, you could actually take slants.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
keep it.
That's
a
a whole
lot of
other
work,
show.
man.
That's,
Yeah,
I wrote that down as a whole other show at this one. 'cause
That is a whole,
lot of effort.
and I'm not sure if I even know anybody that does that around here, me personally. But
I know people who say that, but they don't. I don't think they do the actual slant. They mean
right,
the typical, like what's left after yeast washing. You know, just
right.
Container.
Yeah, and to me, you've really got to be on the micro side,
Right.
microbiology side, to really. I mean, you have to really enjoy that part. I guess you got to have microscopes. You got to have, petri dishes. You
Right.
got to have
What is it? Agar.
agar.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
agar.
You have to actually grow it from
Yeah.
scratch.
Yeah,
pretty
you're
much.
you're basically. I mean, all you're doing is at that point is you're just culturing some of the cells and prolonging them and then growing them back up.
right.
So you have to be able to have microscopes in order to do your pitch cell count. I mean, your cell counts and all of that stuff.
Right.
And it's not just, hey, I'm going to build me a starter the night before from a slant. This is something you're going to have to build a culture up over time.
Period of time, yeah.
Oh, I'm going to culture this up now, and then I'm going to, do a starter, and then step it up, and then step it up until you're ready.
Multiple
Yeah.
times.
But it's a great way to store it. See, that's something that I think that the full-on details of how to do that, the technical side of it, that's definitely a whole episode on its
Well, and
own.
I think that's what White Labs is doing now, because they have like this big, huge, was it Yeast Bank?
Yeah.
And they're releasing all of these strains that they haven't released in years and years. Well, they have them banked, and that's also something that you can do if you're a brewery and you end up with somebody's sound is on. I keep hearing it in the background. It's driving me crazy. But anyway, so if you're a brewery and you get a unique strain, let's say you start out with something, and I think that's even what they're doing with the Conan strain was actually a mutation of the, what is it? What's that one that's the London L3 yeast, I believe.
1318, yeah.
But anyway, you can bank that there, and then they can always keep your cultures, right? So you can start it back up.
You can send them your yeast. They'll store it for you. They'll prop it up for you. They'll send
whenever
you
you're ready.
what
So that's kind of what they're doing. Is some of these they have all these yeast banks that they've had for years, but they've never released a lot of these strains.
Right.
So I think it's kind of a neat thing that they're doing it just to really get, if you're real nerdy about, getting a certain profile from a certain brewery or something like that, it's kind of a neat, unique thing to look at.
Yeah, because
So check
it
that
can
out.
be very specific. I mean,
know-
that's a reason to do any kind of yeast saving, any kind of banking on your own too.
Right.
So
I know that, didn't you get a couple of those, Mike?
I got one of them. I think we have two more. I might buy another one so I can do a good beer with it, and then I'm probably
Well,
gonna
what'd you get?
I get the Melbourne.
The Melbourne?
It's a Australian yeast strain. They do two apparently. They do one that's actually a seasonal, and this is straight out of the yeast bank. So this is an older strain.
Is that like for like Victoria's Bitters or something?
It's
I don't know.
I mean, it's basically if you really research, it's some of these Cooper's yeast strains that were around back in the 80s.
Okay.
That we were get 80s and 90s from homebrew kits. I think that's some of the strains that are.
I don't know if I want that strain.
But I don't know. I need to, and it might also be some English based strains.
Foster's
that were carried over.
I heard that's Australian for beer.
Yeah, absolutely.
well,
made in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. That's what it's Australian for.
If you didn't know that.
Yeah. So here's my biggest dilemma about doing this, and we're going to teach you or tell you a little bit about how to do it. Is to me, time, effort, potential.
It is a lot.
It's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort. And my biggest problem, I guess, would be is potential infection.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
you could go to all this trouble, and
especially
if
you're generations,
right? If your particular procedure is not 100%, well, you got a problem. You just pitched some bacteria into your yeast. So, Greg, why don't you kind of take it and maybe what are some other reasons why you say you would wash
I think
yeast?
Maybe if you were doing,
I guess maybe we should even back it up a little bit. What is yeast washing?
Well,
I guess is the easiest
the
way
other
to say
thing,
it.
maybe if you're doing a lager and you were trying to build that strain up, you only wanted to buy the lager.
That's a strong
yeast
one, yeah.
The one time, and you're going to start low and then build it up. You might want to wash that yeast, especially if you're trying to do really clean lagers.
Right,
You don't
or
wanna wash it.
for example, you start with a lower gravity version.
Right,
You get a good
right.
yeast cake out of that. You want to take that out, and not only have enough there that possibly you could make an immediate starter for your next batch of something bigger. Coming.
Right.
The thing with yeast washing is you're taking everything from the primary fermenter and you're mixing it with sterilized water, and then you're just basically separating the trube from the actual fresh yeast. And there's a lot of yeast in there. I mean, compared to what you would make with a starter, this is by far well beyond that, and it's like making a super starter in a small amount. It's very concentrated. There's a lot of yeast cells in there. So whenever you can take something like that, you can oftentimes, especially if you're about to have that next batch, immediately just take that to pitch While on the other hand, take some of that, like split it up a little bit, and then keep it for that future batch, or maybe start a starter for, say, like a doppelbock if you had a lager. I mean, I think yeast washing, if you did that for a standard lager after what you did in the first place to get a lager done, you have enough. You have 2 or 3 batches probably worth of good yeast in there that you could just immediately go to 3 different lagers too. You know, that's something. So like multiplying the amount of effort with one single cleaning could do something, or just keeping some of that for next time so that you can make a starter, and that starter doesn't need as much yeast put in. So
well, and I can say from pitching on yeast cakes that I've had some issues down the road, especially, you know, if you guys are actually pitching live, you know, I mean, the actual starters or the amount of yeast that you're supposed to be pitching for lagers, it's quite substantial.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and sometimes if you go, oh, I'm going to do a doppelbock, well, and you put it in Mr. Malty, and it might be, oh, you need 3 or 4 packs of yeast in a 5-liter start or 5-gallon starter or something dumb like that, you know?
Yeah.
So it's always been kind of my effort, if I'm going to try to do this or attempt it, start out with a low gravity beer and then maybe go into a bock.
right.
And that makes that low gravity beer is your 5-gallon starter.
Right,
And,
right.
And you get to take that and you're going to drink it. So
right.
that's the
And I've
advantage
done
of
this
that.
a couple times, and then by the time I got to the doppelbock, the issues that I have experienced, me personally, is that I've had a lot of like vegetal type off flavors.
And that would be the key to that, is like yeast pitching on the cake can be successful, absolutely, because I think all of us have done it, especially with lagers and big beer going bigger. But the thing with yeast washing would mean that you take what's left of that first beer with the sterilized water, you mix it up, and you pull out all the actual good fresh yeast from that, and you leave the trub behind, because it's the trub that's causing the problem with that vegetal flavor.
Yeah, and you got all that dead old yeast in there, and protein,
I think,
hops.
I think another thing that helps on the lager end of repitching is that we're not talking about really hoppy beers, so we're not going to have a lot of hop material that makes it over into the fermenter.
Right.
And
if you were to do that, make sure you transfer to a secondary for all those hop additions and whatnot. If there's not a lot of already there, start with the primary. Do not take it from the secondary. Start before you add anything else, spices, hops, anything like that. Start there. Even like if you're wood aging and things, you get any kind of spirits in there, don't do all the yeast harvesting before that, because it's going to make it a problem otherwise.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that's been the biggest issue that I've always had is, you know, you've got to figure out if it's worth it for you to be able to do that. And you know what? I think one of the things, if you're really good about your process and you figure out great ways to knock protein out in the kettle before you transfer it, well, how can you do that? Well, you can whirlpool, you know, and chill at the same time. So you knock the cold break out into your kettle. Make sure to have some sort of hop catching material, you know, whether it be a bags or, you know, hop screen or something of that nature, that you can keep, you know, your hop and protein and everything out of that. I think it goes a long ways when you're actually trying to pitch on top of the cake. So if you don't have that that availability or the process to be able to do that, I think that's when you need to consider washing your yeast. If you're going to step up something and do a second beer or third beer for that from that particular strain. And I think this is probably more prominent, I would think, more so in lagers, just because you need so much yeast in order to do it properly. Wouldn't you say?
And it would save you money in the long run, you know.
Oh, especially in lager yeast.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, if you're doing a doppelbock, if you look at it, you're probably, if you have 4 fresh packs of yeast in a 5-gallon and you're doing a 8 or 9% alcohol beer lager, you're probably still going to have, you know, 2 or 3 gallons worth of starter. I mean, it's just insane how much yeast you have to use in order to properly do those beers. I mean, those yeast are under intense amounts of stress. So
it's 1 billion per milliliter of per degree in Plato, something like that. It's insane.
So if you think about it, I mean, that's you guys are all familiar, and you probably are all brewed lagers or tried to at some point. If you haven't,
or want to,
and the thing is that you'll learn. They're very difficult to to brew. And I think the biggest problem that 99% of all homebrewers make is they don't pitch enough yeast with
Yep.
lagers. So I think some people get a little irritated me a lot of times at the shop, and they come in and they go, well, I'm going to do a lager for my first time. And I'm saying, I always go, okay, are you sure? I just got fermentation temperature control. Okay. And they go, oh, I want to do liquid yeast. I'm like, no, you don't. I mean,
Well,
I hate to say that. And the reason being is because most of the people that just stepped up into a refrigerator or all grain or whatever, they don't have the proper yeast growing capability to use lager yeast.
Well, I
mean,
think even one step further back from I'm going to make my first lager is people don't understand how much yeast you need just to make
a little lager.
a batch of beer to begin with.
An ale, yeah.
The yeast companies for the longest time have said, the Smack Pack is a pitchable pack of yeast. Yes,
Yeah.
it's pitchable in a starter. It's only 100 million cells or 100 billion. You need,
Right.
average of 250 billion on the average
Right.
ale.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so that's something that we're working on at the shop too. We're actually trying to get a yeast calculator together, so you'll be able to. It's just it's going to be pretty generic, but at least give you an idea of what you actually need, how many cells to pitch, and maybe some yeast viability.
Be on the
And-
website
and-
with a
and-
recipe calculator.
Yes.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and I don't want to work on putting that on all the recipes as well. like
TXbrewing.com.
this size starter.
Right, and we're also working on. We actually are working even more to refine the recipe calculator even more. So
Cool.
we're actually working on a part of it to where you guys can. You already have the ability to save your recipes online and easily reorder them or rechange them. But what's going to happen is we're going to even have it to where you can post it on a forum. People can rate it. You can actually buy the recipe from somebody else's post. It'll be really fun and cool. So we've almost got that hopefully done soon. But anyway, I know we kind of got off topic there, but I thought that was kind of a neat thing.
First thing you need to do when you're talking about yeast washing is you've got to have some jars. You got to have some containers
Like a bell jar.
to put them in, and the easiest thing is some canning jars.
Yeah.
They're
They're cheap
jar.
to buy
Mason
at like
jars,
Walmart or whatever. Yeah.
half quart, quart. I've seen people do it in like half gallon, but you're not really able to separate a whole lot out after that.
Right.
But you're basically going to take 3 to 4 like quart jars. You're going to put them in your 5-gallon pot with some water. You're going to boil those. You're going to sterilize the
Sterilize
water.
them. Or if you have a
and-
pressure cooker,
Right, pressure cooker will work.
even better.
You want to sterilize the jar, and you want to sterilize all that water. You want to sterilize the lid, the ring, everything.
Everything.
And then you're going to cool that down, and you want to try and get those lids on in the water.
Okay,
all
so
sterile.
explain to people. Sterilization is different than sanitization.
Yes.
Okay, so
Correct.
Well, and I can't remember what the actual parts per million or how many.
Well, sterilization should come close to the bulk of any kind of anything.
Yeah, I mean
that's
there
on
is
it. It should be
absolutely
gone,
nothing
yeah.
that's going to be
So
able to grow there.
boil it for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
At least 10 minutes
To sterilize.
to sterilize.
Okay.
At boiling, you're going
Yeah,
to
but sanitize is a little different.
sanitize.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember the actual terminology, but there is a
Right.
difference. So it's not
Sterilization would get rid
so-
of everything,
right.
like all the true nasties that can survive
Right.
sanitization.
Right, but whereas sanitization doesn't kill 100% of
Right.
everything. So anyway,
So
just thought I would. So
It's a
don't
good
start.
point.
Well, and the only reason I say that is because somebody are like, well,
don't
why
star
can't I,
san it. Yeah.
why can't I
Yeah.
just put this in star
Spray it
san?
out. Yeah.
You don't want to star san it. You want to sterilize it with boiling water.
Right, and there may be the fact that I used to do something that I thought was really convenient, and I used to can starter wort, and
Mhm.
I would make 5 gallons of something 1030.
Right.
And then I got to reading about it, and I'm like, wow, you know what? There's a good case that you can actually get some botulism in that. So I decided against that. And there was some other stuff that I actually read about, and I'm like, I don't know if that's such a good idea to do that because, you're sitting there and this grows, it's not actually the bacteria that'll kill you. It's the toxin that they produce. So I don't know. And we had actually heard something about somebody in, what was that, in South America? A bunch of people got killed with something. I don't remember. It was like
That
some
would be
sort of.
Kool-Aid at a cult compound in the 70s.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. That wasn't what I was
Oh,
thinking.
you mean the one
about,
with
but-
bullets? There've been bullets too.
Bullets? Okay.
So the difference between sanitization and sterilization is sanitizing something kills all the stuff that would endanger health, whereas sterilization kills all bacteria.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. That sounds good.
So once you've got your containers, and the glass canning jars are the easiest because you can boil them, you can sterilize them. You're going to chill that water down. You can take the jars out. Now the jars have water. You can stick them in the fridge, and you've racked your beer off of that yeast cake. You've moved it over secondary, and you're going to leave just a little bit of liquid left. You're then going to empty those jars into your carboy, into your bucket, and you're going to swirl that water around with that yeast cake, and then you want to evenly put it into each of the jars. You're going to put those lids back on once they're still sterile as best as possible, and you're going to let those settle. And what you're looking for is that yeast and trub to stratify, and all your dead yeast is going to drop to the bottom. All your proteins, all your hot material, all
Right.
that's going to slowly drop to the bottom of your container, and you're going to have near the top, you'll see a pretty good line of division there, and you'll have some creamy white yeast at the top.
Yes, and water.
And
I mean,
water,
the water
yeah.
itself will be the clearest, but there's
Right.
a definite difference between all those two and the trub. The trub is much darker and it's much
Yeah.
denser. So
And why? And and that's even when you're doing a starter. You'll notice when a lot of times I have people call me a lot of times and they're going, "Oh, Stubby, I don't have a Krausen and it's on my stir plate." And I'm like, "No, you're never going to have that." You're just
don't
going to,
want
but you
that.
will definitely notice a color change.
Mm-hmm.
When you first started out, it'll be kind of dark, and then you'll notice it'll get almost like light creamy color. And that is indication that you're growing yeast. You'll also have some white. It's like a white, almost an eggshell color.
Right.
The sediment. That's good, healthy yeast.
Yeah.
But when you got if you've got a low gravity beer and you did your starter wort prep properly, you're not going to necessarily see a Krausen, and that's okay. Don't freak out. I would say though that, especially if you're using a stir plate, you're probably not going to have much of a Krausen. But one of the things I would say though is you'll notice that if you have some activity there, the color will change, but you also may see bubbles coming up the side of the container. Especially if you're doing like an Ormeyer flask, you'll see bubbles coming up. I mean, little tiny micro bubbles, right?
Well, and the other thing you'll see, especially on a starter, when you have yeast activity, that growth is yeast is exothermic. The growth of the yeast is exothermic,
Right.
and you'll see kind of the misting along the flask, and that's how I know when I just a quick walk by. If I see that the glass is starting to kind of mist up, I know that I've got good activity going, and then I can take a peek at the color.
Well, that's a good point too. From people I tell all the time, they're like, "Well, my house stays around 75 degrees." And during primary fermentation, it could actually raise the temperature of your beer almost 10 degrees.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
That's and a lot of people, they always ask me, "Oh, well, I don't need a refrigerator for I'm not doing lagers." So I'm like, "Yeah, but it's going to improve the quality of your ales
Drastically.
Definitely an exothermic.
Because you think about it. Oh, I'm fermenting at 72 degrees. My house is 72. You're probably closer to 80, 82
Right.
degrees. So what are you doing? You're producing a lot of esters. You're producing a lot of phenols. You're producing, well, not necessarily phenols, but golly.
aldehydes.
Yeah. No,
Fusuls.
fusel alcohols.
Fusels.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. But anyway.
But
I
like
digress.
Stubby said, that one of the things especially with a yeast starter, we're not looking for a Krausen. We're not looking for fermentation in that yeast starter. We want growth. That's the entire reason we're doing the yeast starter.
As a matter of fact, you never want your yeast to ferment.
I
Really,
don't-
you
yeah.
just want it.
We
it-
want we
it-
want a 1030 or so starter, and we just want it to grow, so then we can put it in the beer,
Right.
so it can grow some more,
And that's a good point. And this is kind of, I think we're actually kind of skipping ahead a little bit how to use the stored yeast. But why don't you and we can kind of continue that when we get to that. But why don't you go ahead and continue on how to actually, finish up with
out the wash.
The wash, yeah.
So after you've separated out, you've poured your yeast into your jars. You want to have a couple extra.
You already covered the water, right?
Right.
I got up to check our beers for later. Sorry.
Yeah. We've essentially already washed the yeast. If you're following along, we've got it into a few jars where we're letting it stratify, and you want to have a couple extra jars that were sanitized the exact same way. They've been through the entire process as well. And what you want to do is you want to decant off that little bit of the nice clean yeast. You want to put that into another jar, and you can use a little bit of that sanitized water in there as well. And then what you're left with is clean, fresh, ready to go yeast, and that's ready to go in a starter, not ready to go in a beer.
Unless that beer happens to be the next day or two, that kind of thing.
But you're still going to want to. You're going to probably want to do a starter with it, but
depending on the amount that you're getting out of it, that's really the key there. Because you're going to get a lot more trub than you think you're going to get, especially if you let it actually sit for a decent amount of time. I want to say it's at least 45 minutes or so. You'll see it happen, over time.
At least 30 to 45 minutes.
But like he was saying, if you make sure you have, say, 6 jars. If you do 2 and 2, and then you can take 2 and put it into another one. 4 is the first set, and then there's 2. And then possibly, if you need to, if there's that much trub or whatever you're working with, you could even go into a last one, just all of it in one. Because it'll keep doing it until all of it has fallen out and all you really have is that fresh yeast left. And water, of course.
Yeah. So once you've got that separated out and you've got your fresh yeast, you can store that in your fridge for about 3 weeks and then reuse it again.
It can go longer, but you're suffering over long-term effects of like how much that's going to dwindle in viability. You're going to have to go for that multiple starter buildup. It's getting closer to the concept of the slant, but it's just been sitting in distilled water and totally inactive. The science of that, I'd rather have somebody that's a total yeast pro speak on of how far along you could go. Because I know a lot of people that, when they yeast bank, they'll basically it's this. If you have, say, okay, well, you did what we just described. Now you take that and you put it in your fridge, and maybe you've got 8 others of those sitting in there. Well, at some point within a month or so, you need to brew with those yeasts and then do it again to really keep the best batch. But that's also a generational thing because you're already in the second generation of this yeast once you've used the first. And then every time you move beyond that, you only really get up to about 4 to 6 generations before something's probably going to go off. Something's going to be weird with the yeast. Something got in there, whatever it is. But to keep a yeast bank viable, you're going to have to keep doing something, even if it's just making a starter and refreshing that batch of yeast and keeping it big again and doing the same wash, typically. Right. So
I thought Steppy was going to bring in a pen and paper and start drawing for us.
No, but I went to take a piss, so I don't know what y'all are talking about.
We're talking basically about so everything that we just described, what we do to get everything out of it. Well, when you take those, you're going to store them and either 1, use it immediately, or 2, we're talking the general gist has been around 3 weeks or so. But a lot of people keep them a lot longer and then make starters from them, but then you have to build those starters over time to take whatever viable cells that were left. And then some people too, when you bank, they'll make starters on purpose over that. I've got this many sitting here. I want to keep them viable until I get to use it. So they go ahead and it's been a month or so. I'm going to use this stuff, make another starter, and then wash them again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that you have to be really careful with. And
it's like waking it up and putting it to sleep. Waking it up, put it to sleep.
Right. Yeah, and you got to be careful the way you store that too. Yes. Just don't go put it in a mason jar and screw the lid on tight because you might have an explosion. And I'm always
if you have any fermentables in there, that lid needs to stay loose until that thing's totally chilled out and settled out. So.
Right. So that is something that we've had some issues with in the past, but it's always been my biggest concern is that I'm going to all this trouble to save this yeast, and especially if it's a yeast that I can purchase.
Right.
You know, to me, there's no reason to do this. I mean, that's just my opinion. But
if you can get your yeast easy from a local homebrew shop and it's nice and viable, if you didn't have to suffer the
especially
heat,
don't
like getting sent to Mexico or something from North Texas in the middle of summer, then you don't need to do that.
Right, and don't USO5. I mean, dude.
Right.
If you're using USO5, for God's sake, don't try to wash
it's
this
dry,
yeast.
don't worry.
I mean, man, you can go and. I mean, by the time you spend the money and effort, it's much cheaper to just repitch.
It would
you know,
be
so.
specifically hobby at that point. It's for
Yeah,
you
for
doing
sure.
scientific experiments.
Now, mind you, that I think your fourth and fifth generation are probably better yeast and better healthy. But I think in a homebrew setting, that's between brews, even if it's a week, you know, you're not going to have the same viability as if you're just, you know, you're repitching on a cake or washing it and then immediately reusing it like you would in a brewery setting, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And,
And in a brewery, they just take it right from the cone most of the time, which is the cleanest, best yeast out of it.
right.
Very
and
concentrated.
that's the old school method of craft brewing, but a lot of these guys are not doing that anymore.
No.
You know, they've got it a little more refined than that. So,
Well,
bigger breweries anyway. They're just pitching cone to cone, but
that thought of I'll just you know wash it and I'll reuse it. That's great, and we preach sanitation. We preach being as clean as possible. But we're homebrewers. We're doing it in our kitchens, our garages, our sheds. You know,
there's
the
a breeze.
patio. Breweries are doing it in clean rooms. They're doing it indoors. They've got labs.
they don't have dogs running around. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe they do.
Dirty dishes sitting right next to it. A dirty sink.
There's a reason why they have lab material. They have lab instruments. They have labs in their brewery. So they can do this, and they can do it under pristine conditions. So we're not saying don't do it. We're just saying be careful.
Because that's going to ruin all the effort you just put into it.
And once you kind of, I think once you get more and more experience with doing stuff like that, or beer brewing in general, you're going to notice that you'll know when something's off. I mean, you'll know when something doesn't smell right or doesn't look right, or things like that. I think, and that's part of the problem. I think with learning this technique. As a matter of fact, if you guys decide you want to do it, I would just practice washing the yeast first before you actually even try to repitch it. Just try it. I mean, next couple of times you brew, just kind of, I'm going to experiment with this and try to
put it on a smaller batch of something that you might not.
Right.
You might be okay with losing if that's going to be the case. Don't put it on that double IPA.
Take a small
don't do it on
portion
the
of
double IPA. Well, and that's something that, you know, I think some of the guys around here that I know of are doing it because they want the Conan yeast or whatever, and you know, they're keeping that around. So that maybe
brew it again, you know, in a month or two,
right,
and just do it once or twice. But I'm not going to keep this
indefinitely.
The time and patience to try and keep it going as long as
it might be worth trying switching between people, just to see if a whole group of people can learn off of washing one batch of yeast.
That's true.
So they
Make for a
compare
good
the batches.
experiment in a group that's ready to do that. I think that's a great idea, actually. But it's something I wouldn't mind doing here as a group that we can come back to at some point. We're just going to have to pick something and really take care of that first batch and then see what happens. And I think our best answer would be something like a lager, because we can all do that for the most part, and then see what weirdness that can come out of that, you know.
I keep hitting the damn cameras, man. They're right in the damn way every time, and it's always when Mikey's talking too. It looks like he's on he's on a roller coaster, man. So.
Mikey's supposed to look shaky. It's fine.
It's because he is always
shady, not shaky.
That too.
Okay, so
shady and shaky.
Where are we at on
I
this?
think we've covered a lot of what we had to say about that. Obviously, our water, get the fresh yeast off of it, and then try to use it as soon as possible. We may have some, I don't know if we've had any Facebook comments about that might have something to say with, you know, how long to keep it or what luck people have had with it. Because I know people have better luck now. They'll keep it for a while and then use it in a good starter or two, and then, you know, make it work.
So here's two tips that I'd like to, in closing with this, is just a tip. Oh, let's
Just for a minute.
All right. So, no, really, one of the things is I wouldn't go longer than 4 or 6 generations in a home
Right.
brewing batch. Only reason I say that because you have a tendency of really having some mutations in a small level batch like what we're doing as home brewers.
Or something might have gotten in there in your process.
Yeah, exactly. So you're building up. You're not only building up yeast, you're building up some kind of other funk. So the second thing is that keep this in mind. You don't want to go in there and let's go, oh, I'm going to do a Belgian quad or a Belgian triple, and I'm going to save this yeast. Just get rid of it because that yeast is so wore out and it's got an opportunity.
From the Belgian quad or triple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the big beer.
From the
Don't
big
use that
beers,
yeast.
just don't reuse that because those beers are so big and the yeast is under such stress that they can mutate. So
Right.
the next time you're not going to get the same flavors that you may be expecting from that particular yeast.
You want to
strain.
start on a low gravity beer. You want to start
Low to medium strength.
low. You want to go medium. You want to go high. I do 3 generations and I throw it off.
Well, you
'Cause
have
I
to
mean-
you have to look at it this way in a brewing set, or like in a brewery type setting. These guys are using these yeast for lower alcohol beers, and then they go, "Oh, let's do a stout," and they use that for that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going to take that back and go, "Oh, I'm going to put this yeast from this Belgian triple or quad back into my blonde that I'm doing."
Right.
Right.
You know?
That yeast is done at that point.
Because when you
for them.
open up, say you did it in a bucket, if you open that up, you transfer and you look down and go, man, I've got 4 inches of what looks like a great yeast cake there. Don't be tempted by that.
Mhm.
Just don't. It's just,
Right.
it's not going to be good.
I
Not
can
at
also
all.
And I'm
speak to
sure
this
there's
on
an
the mead
exception
side.
to every.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
I'm sure there's an exception to every rule in that regard too, but I would say from a home brew standpoint, I don't think I would do that.
Right.
And the reason being is because we can't tell if we have, we don't have microscopes for the most part.
And you're
we
you're
can't-
talking about a beer that's going to cost some money too. Bigger beers
Right.
cost more money always.
Yeah,
no
for
matter what they
sure.
are, and time. you know.
Yeah, so those are all things that
One
that
other
I want you
rule
to kind of
that I would say that you might be able to bend on that, as we talked about pitching on the yeast cake. If you had a really clean fermentation and that yeast looks really nice and pretty, it's worth a try if you're willing to put that beer on the next beer on top of that, especially if it's going to have like a lot of flavors that might get in the way of something that might be an off flavor.
Right.
Like if it's big and dark, it might be something that knocks out some of the flavors that you might get from having that excess amount of trub in there. You
Right.
know? But that's to you. That's definitely not the
yeah.
best practice.
Well,
It's
and
something
that's-
that
that's-
does work on occasion.
And that's something there's something to be said for that because I would look at it from this standpoint, and as far as a home brewer is concerned, is if I'm a all grain brewer and I buy in bulk sacks, and I've got some extra stuff, that we
Child.
I don't know. We hadn't got to the puns yet. I'm just
know,
saying
right?
it's coming. But anyway, you might be more willing to do some more experimentation with stuff like that because it's not as expensive for you. But I would never do that on an extract brew. The only
Right.
reason I say that is because of expense wise. So I'm not going to spend $20 on some extract and throw it on some suspect yeast. So
We've got a Facebook question from Dwayne Hudson. He says, "What about trying to harvest yeast from bottle dregs of a high gravity beer, say 9%?" That's a great question. The biggest answer we're going to give you is that the yeast that they used,
Right.
or is that a bottling yeast? A lot of people want to rebrew Sierra Nevada and they want to use that yeast.
it's not the same
that's-
yeast.
The yeast in the bottle of Sierra Nevada is a bottling yeast. It's not the Chico yeast that they use.
Exactly.
which is
From what I
USO5.
understand is they actually centrifuge that beer and then put it back in. So they repitch it
Mhm.
with some sugar. So they knock every single yeast cell out of suspension and then repitch it with some bottling yeast. And now, if you're talking some sour type stuff, that's probably more acceptable, I would
Right.
think, than
Your
if you're
ratios
doing,
won't be the same, but yes.
Right.
The other side.
You
to
would
that-
still, I would still build it up though,
Right.
even
Yes.
if it was a yeast
That's one where you could
funky thing,
take a higher gravity beer because you're talking about what's in the bottle,
bacteria.
Bacteria.
and you could
Mainly.
then repitch that. But you also got to look at, was the beer pasteurized? Because if it's pasteurized,
Yeah, it's
Uh,
not
yeah.
going to have any live cells in it anyway.
those live cells, or that cell, the yeast in there is dead. The bacteria in there is dead.
That's one thing I was
So-
going to ask about is what about the unfiltered, like Belgian and Trappist ones?
I would be willing to say that they're probably using bottling yeast too.
Yeah, they are.
Right.
You're
but-
probably going to get at least 2 yeasts out of those if they've
Yeah.
not been pasteurized, they've not been filtered or whatever. So
And even
Right.
still, if you think about it, if you're able, man, that's something to think about too. Because if you're just using some DME to make a starter with, and it doesn't pan out, and you just lost, and most of these Belgian style beers, we're going to be drinking some tonight. I would venture to guess that most of them are pretty old anyway. So
Right.
the viability of any yeast cells in there at all are probably slim to none anyway. And if there are some, they're probably
Highly stressed.
they're highly stressed or almost dead, or there's very few of them. So I think that's a tough concept. Now I know some people that have had high success with doing sour dregs, but from sour beers, but those are
that's
way
fairly
different.
common. Yeah.
Those are very different.
And even in that situation, it's not going to be the same mix that brewery pitched on that beer
Exactly.
because, your Saccharomyces is going to be out of bounds faster than any of the bacteria
Sure,
reproduces. And
for
even
sure.
there, you're going to have differences between, say, Brett and PDO
Well, even if they
and
use-
lactose.
well, let's say if they had a sour beer and they use champagne yeast to
Right.
to ferment or to bottle condition with it, because a lot of times, once you're getting these sour beers, they're so acidic that a lot of
Right.
Saccharomyces can't even carbonate because the pH is too low. So a lot of times guys will use stuff like champagne yeast that can handle the acidity. Well, in that regard, you're going to be repitching champagne yeast on your beer, So there's all kinds of different things to consider there.
For some of that too, you can usually find a listing somewhere about what beers are actually worth doing that on. If
Yeah, I
you're
think
really
Milk-
into
if-
the sour thing, you can
Milk
find
the
it.
Funk
Milk
actually
the Funk
has.
will
I
have
think
something like that.
actually
Yeah.
has a list of what's a viable
viable bottle dregs.
dregs,
Yeah.
that you can actually rebuild up and reuse. But anyway, I think that's a good stopping point from here. We're gonna take a quick break, and then we're gonna come back and
We
we're
got
gonna
20
talk
minutes to carry in all the beer Stubby bought. That's all Golden Strong for all of us to drink all of it
And
tonight.
it's all warm.
Yeah, so,
we're gonna chill
uh,
it in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, so we're going to do that. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the style, and then we're going to drink some more beer. And there's a couple of things that I kind of want to go over to before we get started with that, but we'll be right back.
Cheers.
Cheers. Pizza is out for delivery now.
Let's see.
Good thing.
Let me in.
I left
Okay.
a note on the pizza saying, "Call when arrived. We are recording live."
Okay, so got one guy who was like, "Hey, I'm in this